welcome to this episode of my Clarendon Chronicles podcast. And my guest today is Dr. KATRINA Burrus, CEO and lead coach, MKB Excellent Executive Coaching. Dr. Burrus has coached global leaders in multinational companies and organizations such as Nestlé, Novartis, and the United Nations. KATRINA was, in fact, the very first International Coach Federation Master Certified Coach in Switzerland and the founder and former board member of ICF Switzerland. Dr. Burrus, who holds a PhD, also teaches postgraduate courses at various universities around the world and facilitates workshops on global leaders, executive coaching, and successful integration into a new role. KATRINA is a highly visible coach, being an acclaimed global keynote speaker, having published over 350 podcasts of her own to date and hosting her own MKB Leadership TV show, in fact. And in addition, she's published numerous articles and written several books in various languages, including the titles Global Nomadic Leaders, When the Visionary is Blinded, Coaching Brilliant and Abrasive Leaders, and Managing Brilliant Jerks, How Organizations and Coaches can transform a difficult leader into a powerful visionary. KATRINA, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a real pleasure, Jeremy.
Incredibly busy schedule. It's taken us ages to get this slot together. So thank you for making the time. And can I start, if I may, by making an observation, having studied your articles and your books. Your coaching philosophy explores in many cases the art of leadership and equally addresses the challenges when faced with poor examples of leadership. And in fact, my own summary title for this podcast is In and Around Beyond Brilliance, Converting Technical Excellence into Good Leadership. And your work regularly explores the fact that simply being a good technical leader and a good technical expert doesn't automatically mean that we are good leaders. So can you expand how you've formed that view that we don't automatically become good leaders, KATRINA?
Well, a lot of organizations, they promote a leader that is very good in their field, and they have expertise that maybe others don't, and they hope by promoting them that expertise will go to the group and the team. And that's a big assumption, because usually that person is very passionate about their expertise, has spent years in developing that expertise. Maybe they're incredibly brilliant, very smart. And then when you put them in leadership position, they sometimes have a conflict between developing their own expertise and being a leader, where you have to step back, delegate, and let the others perform. So that's a very big step. Now, these experts, in a lot of cases that are very, very bright, and highly motivated. They're driven. They're sort of alphas, and they expect the people that they lead often to have that same drive and that same quickness of mind. And so they're very dismissive by saying, oh, they're lazy or they're stupid or this or that, and don't realize, one, it took them years to get there. And second, maybe you have to look at the effort as well as the ability and the outcome.
I'm smiling, KATRINA, because I'm fairly sure that people who've worked with me in the past will have seen some of those exact characteristics and wondered what kind of leader I could be. And I mean, you've published many books on this subject, many articles. Your best-selling book is entitled Managing Brilliant Jerks, How Organizations and Coaches Can Transform a Difficult Leader into a Powerful Visionary. So that suggests that the concept of a difficult leader is actually more common than we would like to admit. And in my experiences, it's very common indeed. Again, surrounded by really, really good people but struggling to be the leader. How do you approach that as a coach, Katrina?
So first, I'll just say in the statistics from the Creative Leadership Center that 70% of successful leaders have had at least one intolerable boss in their careers. That means 3 out of 4 of us that are in the business might have a difficult boss. So that just shows the problem. Now, I think the first thing is to distinguish a demanding boss from a toxic boss. A demanding boss has high standards, but creates an environment that will help the person that they're leading to succeed. Get out of the way, support them, help their thinking, develop them. Okay. The toxic boss is usually someone that is more focused on their outcome, and anything that's impeding their outcome, they get aggressive towards. And so if the person's too slow or made a mistake, it tends to be an outburst. Okay. So it's debilitating for the person, but I want people to understand that if the leader does that, it's also because they have high pressure on themselves to succeed, and they're very driven. And so I'll give you an example. Now, if a toxic boss sees a problem, interprets it as the incompetence of the other. So they go into the fight mode, which means they dominate, they intimidate, they threaten. They tend to do this. Well, the demanding boss sees a problem, same thing, identifies the problem. Is the problem because the person is not capable of doing it, for example, because they don't have the skill set, or are they unmotivated? Just to give you 2 examples to do it. But then adapts his leadership according to the situation at hand. There's an analysis that has been done. How is the best strategic approach to help this person succeed, and what leadership they need to implement to get the best outcome? So they're a bit in meta. Well, a difficult boss might be, stressed and have the outburst. Now, we are all stressed at times, and we can be a little bit toxic, but the difference is the toxic boss, it's over time. It's a repetitive behavior that is debilitating for the other person, that demoralizes people. And there's also research that says even people that are not the target of the toxic leader, but witnesses, they tend to make more mistakes because the psychological safety isn't there, and they get tense.
I think that's a really powerful point, and that differential between the demanding boss and the toxic boss, and people may have seen those as being one and the same, and you've just described that actually they're not at all. One of your articles, Katrina, talks about 5 steep costs that companies pay because of a toxic boss. So what are those kind of costs? You described the indirect effect, perhaps, on other people. What are the other things that give us a problem in corporate from having a toxic boss?
Well, there's probably more than 5, but I would say absenteeism. People don't want to go to work as much. Then there might be presenteeism, which they're present, but they're emotionally dealing with an outburst, and so they're not really, focused on the job. There's retention issues, reputation issues. I mean, myself, I had a very alluring job offer, but when I found out there were very toxic bosses and also very discriminative towards women, I didn't take the job offer. So reputation to hire good people. And even on a financial, I remember when I was a financial analyst, Philip Morris had a very good PE, price over earning.
Yep,
Why?
sure.
Because they were considered as very good managers.
Mm.
So even financially, it has repercussion. Then there's cost on the team. So we saw some of the cost on the organization. There's cost on the team. You know, if the messenger of bad news is aggressed, then they're less likely to say when there's a problem. So they don't get the help when there's a problem, how to solve it. And the other thing is the problem tends to grow and it has to become a crisis before the leader is aware of the situation. They don't feel, again, that psychological safety to bring up any potential problem before it becomes a crisis.
Yeah, it's that delegation upwards, isn't it? In that if people aren't happy to bring bad news, which in reality, for those of us who've all worked in corporate, it's that challenge of dealing with the bad news that that can distinguish a good leader, in my opinion, as well, because anybody can deliver great news. It's easy to do that, but the management of bad news or unwelcome news is likely to happen by the law of averages 50% of the time. And if you constrain your news management to good news until, as you absolutely say, Katrina, you get to that, well, it's now a crisis. You've lost the ability to manage that as well. I mean, equally, Katrina, you've published 2 articles that explore respectively 5 signs that you work for a brilliant jerk, and you've described some of them there, and managing a brilliant jerk. So again, how can we identify individuals that actually may need a little bit of help and support, and how do we address it? Because we've identified it. What do we do about it in your perspective as a coach?
Yes. Okay. So in my book, Managing Brilliant Jerks, there is a whole page on the characteristics of abrasive jerks. So causes workplace division and conflict instead of harmony, undermines, sabotages others. They attack one, so it intimidates others so that they don't respond. But let's go to the more unusual thing, is how to address them. So as a coach, because you get all this information in books, but so I have a deep respect for these brilliant experts, okay? And usually what people do in the company, or they fire them, so they lose their expertise and the results of these high producing individuals, or they isolate them because they can't deal with people. So it's very expensive to isolate somebody that is a good expert, okay? So I believe that you should give them a second chance because they are brilliant. And if you can give them irrefutable data that they're incompetent in some area, but brilliant in others, they're more likely to be bothered that they're not brilliant in that area.
Because they've all got these people have got egos as well.
That's right.
I guess we all have egos to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I guess there is that element of flattering the ego. And I'm thinking I worked for somebody once, and I've worked for any number of people. So I think it's quite difficult to pinpoint who it is. But this person had an enormous ego. And I don't think they'll be watching this. But there was an element of, it was quite a, this person was difficult to work for. They had a big ego, but I did actually have a really almost grudging respect for what they were doing because their business model, the way that they looked at the corporate world, was really very, very good. But the other parts of that character were very difficult to deal with. And I guess many of the listeners, I know that people will be watching this and thinking, I can name half a dozen people who fall into the categories that you've described. And you've seen as a coach, Katrina, leadership styles evolve as well over time. I've been working corporate for 30 years. one of your articles, in fact, is entitled "Why the New Normal Office Culture Cannot Have the Same Old Abrasive Boss," the kind of command culture in there. From working with some of the very high profile organizations that you've worked with, can you expand upon what that new normal office culture could look like in corporate arenas?
I think there's an acceleration of change, and an entrepreneur sees opportunity, and they have to constantly check out. So they're out of the box thinkers sometimes, and they see a potential positive element that others don't, but they need to constantly check the marketplace and validate if that's consumer. For the consumer, it's really important. So they have to be super leadership flexible to scan the environment. And they also, today, you see by people can't have a top down. That style works in the Ford system where you could predict over the years that it would go up. I interviewed Peter Brabeck. I didn't coach him because I went to cite him, but I interviewed him, and he says, I do a blueprint for all the company because a year and a half, but not further, because we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So to keep the flexibility, yes, have a direction, have a vision, galvanize people to go there, but still always check out the market and not go too far ahead, because you're assuming too much that you know how the market will turn. Then you have these younger people that don't have the same value system as the boomers, that also will look at life quality a lot more and want more liberty and have a different way of thinking. And so this leadership is outdated, really. So they have to adapt. Yes.
So you and I as coaches, and we've spoken before, what's the reception that we get from the brilliant jerks? Because as you've described, they could be super intelligent, super inspirational, very entrepreneurial. What reaction do you in particular get from people who might have quite a challenging ego? How do they respond in general to you as a coach talking to them and saying, do you know what, you could actually do this better? Do you get a good response, or do you get a bad response to that?
Okay, that's a very good question. And the thing is, they come in, you're a coach, you're a helper, right? Okay. And they say, who's this person trying to tell me how to run my business? If you say to them, oh, you can be more productive. I'm here. I do X amount of results, and you're telling me what to do? So that I don't think usually works. What is important is, as a catalyst, we're a catalyst, but we're not part of the corporation. Is I try to check with the boss of the person if they've discussed already the issue of their interpersonal management or leadership. And usually it's, maybe a little bit, but not too much. They don't want to, rock the boat. So I really say, before I start, I want you to really explicate to the leader, the senior leader, what you feel is not going well. So it comes from leadership. So I don't interfere. Sometimes they say, oh, yes, we have. But it's so, I meet the difficult leader, brilliant, but difficult. And so I ask them, so what have you heard? Why do you think I'm here? Why have they brought me in? And if it says, I don't know. So, and they might say it maliciously too. So I usually ask or help the leader, the boss of this person, to communicate. And I also work with a difficult leader and say, look, there's rumors that are not serving your career from what I hear. Would you like to find out what those are? And I say, you don't have to agree with your boss, but what we're there to find out is how he perceives this situation. And then you can agree or not. But for you, woman or man, to understand them, you have to listen. And so I'll reassure the boss of this person by saying, I will facilitate. I help the conversation. And also it helps me to understand at least what the boss's perception is, what they expect from the coaching, how they will validate the coaching, what they need to see, and their idea of what coaching can do or not. So it helps, that triad. And so then, okay, they say, so you are going to make me fuzzy wuzzy? Huh? And when I get all the results here, I'm not here to hold people's hand. I'm here to get the work done. Yes, absolutely. So I say, but I try to get who they value in the company. And I say, would you be interested to know how people perceive you as brilliant and what is getting in your way or what these rumors potentially are? That's all I want to do in the first meeting, is convince them and tickle their curiosity to see. And then I could say, I could also find out, if you're interested, any question you might have or ideas people have a different level of how to improve the outcome. So I think,
I think there's some really powerful advice in there as well. And I'm sure you and I both work with people who aren't particularly receptive, certainly in the first instance, to being told things that they potentially don't really want to hear. But I have a phrase I use in my own coaching by saying, if people come to me and talk about coaching or mentoring, and I say, well, what do you want to achieve? And I do find that sometimes is an element of a gap as well, in that people come and say, well, I've heard about coaching and mentoring, but I'm not quite sure about it, which is fine. In fact, I do workshops on literally just allowing people to find out what it is. And I say, well, first of all, why don't we just get rid of this almost perception of perfection cloak that we wear, which is, as an individual in corporate, we perhaps think we've made it, we're at a level, we've just been promoted, we've just got a salary raise, and therefore we're a complete finished article, and we're not. And I think if we can get to that stage, it can really, really help as well. So some really powerful advice, I think, on that as well. And you also know implementing change is difficult in organizations as well. You have a coaching philosophy which considers how to inspire an accepting, agile mindset to get ahead of change. How do we actually do that? How can we facilitate change from a coaching angle?
So usually they're quite brilliant at for seeing a potential for the company or a product. Let's say if it's a product, there might be a fabulous product, but they're not going to the market to find out how it's valued by the consumers. That any entrepreneur can fall in that category. Or like working with an high-tech company, they fall in love with the product, but they're not experts in distribution or marketing. So there needs to be also a pool of experts that have these different skills. But in the beginning, you can't afford all these experts. So you got to get a good product and test it out with consumers. Make sure that the cost of producing the product is not outweighs the value to the consumer. And these are natural business ideas.
Mm.
Usually, they're pretty good at that. Now, where I look at is how they can develop their emotional intelligence of people so that they can develop the skill sets for the future that they see.
Mm.
Okay. And what they need. So it's less in the business sense, because usually they're very smart in that area, but it's more in the people area of what is the skill set they'll need if they step back and delegate, and what they need to do to give the vision, the direction, the clarity, the follow through, the follow up, and to get that and be strategic with their time. So, I mean, this is not necessarily a brilliant jerk, but one person, he got into a new CEO role after being a very good technician in trading.
Mm.
And he spent a lot of time designing the Christmas cards. No. So basically, it's finding out what reassures him by doing those Christmas cards, something that he can do easily, that he likes to do. What is it taking away from being strategic that he's fearing? So to uncover that.
Yeah. I think what you've described there, and I've seen this a lot, I'm sure you have too, in that it takes it takes some effort sometimes to allow yourself to be surrounded by other really good people as well, because they can attract attention because of their skills and their leadership efforts. And I've always taken the view that it's great to have fantastic people on the team, and because it's great for them, but also, and maybe I've become slightly better at it as I went through my exec career, but recognizing actually I'm not very good at some things either, and other people are really, really good at the things I'm not very good at, and having that blend of the team. So, again, really, really powerful advice. And finally, Katrina, you've done over 350 podcasts of your own
But before we go to the
worldwide. Yeah,
podcast,
sure.
I
Yeah.
just want to say I worked with a leader that is very technically oriented and detail oriented.
Mm.
And he used to have his number two that is big picture oriented, sees the future, but is not detailed oriented. So always had difficulty to say exactly the number of sales he's did, but he could see the future and he liked, it was comfortable. But each time the boss saw his number two forecasting, he got very uncomfortable and tried to clip his wings and restrain him into his comfort zone instead of leveraging the difference. And that can be also a lot of coaching to help them be comfortable where they're and knowledgeable of where they're expert, and then leverage the other people's expertise for the vision they have.
I think that, again, really, really good advice as a coach, in that I can see is a challenge for a lot of people to allow people to get better around you, and perhaps challenge some of the opinions that you have. And I mean, I referenced to 350 podcasts.
Yeah.
You've interviewed many exceptional leaders. You've got your own TV show. You've been invited to address many audience as a keynote speaker. So you have come across some great leaders. For our listeners, what would be two or three characteristics of the great leaders that they all have? What are those things that we can take away that you can condense into some really powerful takeaways for the audience? How do we become a great leader?
That's a big question. I'll tell you three types of leader I was very impressed with. Okay. Now, my bias is I'm a big picture person. Okay. And these people were more big picture. Like the CEO of Nestlé, Peter Brabeck, who I followed through his career, when he was CEO, he was much more operational. And then when he was chairman, he was much more visionary.
Yeah.
So it depends the leadership and the time and his function that he has to do. Okay, so when he was CEO, it's much more short term, clarity, inspirational of what engaging other people, seeing the downturn before the others. You know, they were a very successful company, Nestle, at least the time I was interviewing him. And he said, you know, my biggest job is that people don't become complacent because we're so much far ahead from our competitors. So but you see how intangible? How do you make people less complacent? So that's something he had to do, but also give them a clear direction and a vision of what's potential. As a chairman, he was water, future oriented, how Nestle could work within the European common market. So very big picture. Again, he had a different function. The CERN, who was a physicist, very good physicist, and then he was promoted to the director general of the CERN, which is the biggest fundamental research center. Well, he saw 30, 40 years ahead of time. He had to plan for that. And also, he had to be, it's a political institution. He gets money from different countries. He had to be an astute politician.
Yeah.
So I can't say there's one format for it's what type of leader requirements are there and how he can develop the skills and what he has naturally more skills of. And then the head of the physicist, which is not the director general, but had to motivate researchers in fundamental physics. He said, look, it's like herding wild cats. They're all very individualist.
Yeah.
So he was also a politician and to deal with these big egos and drive them, you know. So, but I think curiosity, interest in the other, listening skills and being an open mindset that they think differently than you, so that you can explore how best to interact with them, I would say are definitely very important skills.
No, that's really helpful because if it was that easy, we'd all be fantastic leaders without any issues, and all of our colleagues would think we're wonderful. But we all know in real life it's not that easy. And we get wrapped up in the challenges of day to day and perhaps lose sight of some of the strategy. And that for me was why I became a coach and a mentor to try and allow people to have that reflective space. And allow them to see different things between the 9 and the 5 and allow people to flourish behind them, with them, ahead of them in certain cases as well. So really powerful advice. Katrina, thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
time today. A 30-minute whistle stop tour. If you wouldn't mind, hold your book up again, if you would. So you have the Managing Brilliant Jerks book, which is your best-selling book.
Yes. And
It's
it's a
on the
story.
title, and
And
that
yeah,
feels like something that could be well worth reading for all of our
thank you.
audience, and would be great to hear more about it in the future as well.
And
Katrina, thank
I
you
would like
again.
I would like to tell the audience, though, that they have to come to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast and hear your podcast because I have the utmost respect for Jeremy because you're really a senior coach that does thorough work as a coach. So I appreciate that. And I'm very honored to be on your podcast.
That's really kind of you. I really enjoyed it. As I say, you've done so many podcasts with some amazing people on your podcast as well. But absolutely, let's. I'll put that in the detail as well. But thank you again for your time. It has been a real challenge to get 30 or 40 minutes or so together.
Sorry.
It seems seamless, but we managed to do it in the end. How do we get in touch with you? How do we find you? You've got your book, you have your podcast. You're very easily findable, I think, on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Is there any other way that we need to understand how to contact you, how to tie into what kind of work that you're doing, Katrina?
So my website, excellentexecutivecoaching.com. And of course, Dr. Katrina Burrus, Burrus. You'll find me for sure.
We'll find you. We'll find you. Katrina, thank you so much again. It's been my pleasure to have you. Thank you again for your time. And until the next Clarendon Chronicles podcast, bye for now.
Thank you.